In 1227, when Genghis Khan passed away, he bequeathed the largest dominion the world had ever witnessed. Yet, many are unaware that within 4 decades, this immense realm descended into civil strife, completely disintegrating a mere century later. What factors led to such a decline? How could such a formidable empire turn against itself? And, critically, could the Mongol Empire have endured longer if its inheritors had chosen a different path? Before delving into the specifics, please share your current location and time in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to know. Today, we're exploring a lesser-known chapter of history, the Mongol Empire following Genghis Khan's death. It's a tale steeped in ambition, authority, pivotal decisions, and unforeseen consequences. To grasp the reasons behind the Mongol Empire's fragmentation, one must understand Genghis Khan's legacy. Upon his death in 1227, he apportioned power among his 4 principal sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Ögedei, and Tolui. This wasn't merely a division of inheritance. It was the partition of an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Jochi received the Western territories, which later evolved into the Golden Horde in Russia. Chagatai was granted Central Asia. Ögedei, the 3rd son, was designated Great Khan, the direct successor. Tolui inherited the Mongol heartland. It seems logical, doesn't it? However, this was precisely where the seeds of its downfall were sown. Genghis Khan hadn't established a clear system of succession. His reliance was on personal fealty, devotion to an individual rather than a nation or the concept of the Mongol Empire. And with the death of that individual, so too vanished that loyalty. Ögedei ascended the throne in 1229, 2 years after his father's demise. His selection was intriguing. Unlike his brothers, Ögedei wasn't an exceptional warrior. He recognized this, but therein lay his strength. Ögedei possessed humility, a rare trait for those wielding absolute power. He had the capacity to heed his commanders and leverage the talents of others. He was a pragmatist, focused on outcomes rather than methods. Under Ögedei's leadership, the Mongol Empire continued its expansion. In 1234, he finalized the conquest of the Jin dynasty in China. Campaigns commenced in Western Asia. Most significantly, he initiated an invasion of Europe. From 1237 to 1241, Mongol armies under Batu Khan devastated Rus, Poland, and Hungary. Cities fell one after another. European forces, including the Templars, were vanquished. In April 1241, at the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, the Mongols inflicted a crushing defeat on the Hungarian army. The path to Vienna and the rest of Europe lay open. And then they halted. Why? Because in December 1241, Ögedei died. He passed away after a night of heavy drinking, hardly a heroic end for the ruler of the world's grandest empire. According to Mongol tradition, all princes were required to return for a kurultai, a council, to elect a successor. Batu Khan and the Western army retreated from Europe and never returned. European history was altered by a bottle of wine. This serves as our initial reminder. Personal choices, no matter how trivial they may seem, can reshape the course of history. But more captivating than Ögedei's death is what transpired next. For the subsequent 5 years, from 1241 to 1246, the Mongol Empire was without a great Khan. Instead, it was governed by Toragin Khatun, Ögedei's widow. Toragin was a shrewd and ambitious woman. She spent 5 years forging alliances, eliminating rivals, and ensuring her son, Guyuk, would become the next great Khan. And she succeeded. Guyuk acceded to the throne in 1246, but Guyuk and Batu Khan, the commander of the European campaign, harbored mutual animosity. Both were grandsons of Genghis Khan. Both believed themselves more worthy of power than the other. In 1248, Guyuk mobilized his army to confront Batu, but he died en route. The cause of death remained uncertain, possibly illness, possibly poison. The empire was once again leaderless. This time, Batu Khan, powerful enough to claim the title of Great Khan himself, declined it. Perhaps because he was too distant from Karakorum, the empire's capital. perhaps because he wasn't willing to abandon his newly conquered territories in Russia. Instead, he endorsed Monk, another grandson of Genghis Khan, from Tolui's lineage. Monk seized power in 1251, and he did something his predecessors had not. He eliminated his adversaries. Monk orchestrated a bloody purge. Members of the families of Ögedei and Chagatai, who had conspired against him, were executed. This marked the first instance in the Mongol Empire's history of royal blood being shed for political motives. A boundary had been crossed, and once a boundary is crossed for the first time, it becomes easier to cross it repeatedly. Monk was a capable ruler. He controlled expenditures, conducted a census, and safeguarded civilians. The populace admired him. Under Monk's leadership, the empire continued to expand. His brother, Hulagu, was dispatched to conquer Western Asia, leading to the capture of Baghdad in 1258. This act marked the end of the 5-century-long Abbasid Caliphate. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, then the world's most significant repository of knowledge, was utterly destroyed. It was said that the Tigris River turned black from the ink of countless scrolls tossed into its waters. Simultaneously, Kublai, another of Monk's brothers, was tasked with completing the subjugation of China. Everything appeared to be proceeding smoothly. The Mongol Empire had reached its zenith. However, in 1259, Mongke Khan died during the siege of Diaoyu Castle in China. The repercussions were severe, largely because Mongke had not designated an heir. His two brothers, Kublai and Arikbok, both asserted their claim to the title of Great Khan. This time, neither was willing to yield. The Toluid Civil War, which raged from 1260 to 1264, proved to be a pivotal moment in the history of the Mongol Empire. This was more than a mere conflict between two brothers. It represented a clash between two fundamentally different visions for the empire's future. Arikbok championed the traditionalist faction. He remained in Karakoram, the ancestral Mongol capital, convinced that the empire's core should stay in the steppes, where Mongols, as nomads, upheld their ancestral customs. Kublai, conversely, was in China. He recognized that to govern a settled empire, adaptation to local civilization was crucial. He recruited Chinese officials, delved into Chinese characters, and demonstrated respect for Chinese culture. This engagement wasn't merely a contest between two leaders, but a collision of two ideologies. Should the Mongols cling to their nomadic heritage, or ought they to adjust to governing conquered peoples? Initially, Arikbok held the advantage. He controlled the capital and convened a Kurultai, where he was proclaimed Great Khan. Kublai, however, possessed a more critical asset: resources. Kublai commanded northern China, one of the wealthiest regions globally. He had a considerably larger army, composed not only of Mongol cavalry, but also Khatan and Jurchen warriors, whose fighting styles resembled the Mongols, along with tens of thousands of Han infantrymen. Kublai employed tactics of economic warfare. He blockaded Mongolia, cutting off food supplies, which led to a famine in Karakoram. In 1261, Arikbok was compelled to engage in battle. He suffered defeat at Chagatai and retreated. 10 days later, he attempted another push in the Jinggongshan area, but the result was a stalemate. Yet, the outcome of wars isn't solely determined by battles, but by logistics. Arikbok relied on the Yenisei River Valley to supply his forces. This was insufficient, however, to contend with someone who controlled all the resources of northern China. In 1264, Arikbok capitulated. Kublai imprisoned him. 2 years later, in 1266, Arikbok mysteriously died in captivity. Many suspected Kublai had poisoned his own brother. The truth will never be known to us. One thing, however, is certain. Kublai won the war, but shattered the empire's unity. Kublai's triumph came at a high cost. The three Western Uluses, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Ulus in Central Asia, and the Ilkhanate in Persia, refused to acknowledge Kublai as Great Khan. They continued to send envoys and maintain diplomatic relations, but were, in essence, independent. Worse still, the Uluses began to feud amongst themselves. Berk Khan of the Golden Horde was a devout Muslim. When Hulagu, the ruler of the Ilkhanate, massacred Muslims in Baghdad, Berke was enraged. In 1262, war erupted between the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate. Mongols fought Mongols. Berke even allied with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, an enemy of the entire Mongol Empire, to fight against Hulagu. This was an extraordinarily significant historical juncture. For the first time, religious and regional interests superseded loyalty to Genghis Khan's lineage. Meanwhile, Kublai contended with Kaidu, a grandson of Ögedei. Kaidu held sway over a portion of the Chagatai Ulus and consistently challenged Kublai's authority. The war between Kublai and Kaidu persisted for decades, from the 1260s until Kaidu's death in 1301. It depleted the resources of both sides. In 1304, a peace treaty was signed between the Uluses, nominally recognizing the suzerainty of the Yuan dynasty. But this was merely on paper. In reality, the unified Mongol Empire had ceased to exist. The four Uluses functioned as independent polities, each pursuing its own agenda. Kublai Khan was not a poor successor. In fact, he was among the most gifted rulers of the Mongol Empire. In 1271, Kublai formally established the Yuan dynasty. This marked the first instance in Chinese history where a dynasty founded by foreigners ruled all of China. In 1279, he completed the conquest of the southern Song dynasty. All of China fell under Mongol dominion. Kublai was a pragmatic ruler. He hired Chinese officials but kept Mongols in key positions. He respected Chinese culture but did not permit Mongols to fully assimilate. He established two capitals, Shangdu, known as Xanadu, in the north, which allowed Mongols to uphold their nomadic customs, and Dadu, present-day Beijing in China. He actively encouraged commerce, leading to the Silk Road flourishing under Kublai's reign. The renowned Italian merchant Marco Polo visited China during this era, spending many years at Kublai's court. However, Kublai also made costly errors. I initiated two attempted invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281. Both expeditions ended in complete disaster as thousands of warships were destroyed by typhoons, which the Japanese called kamikaze or divine wind. Furthermore, I dispatched military campaigns to Vietnam and Java. These also proved unsuccessful. These ventures not only drained vast financial resources but also undermined my reputation as an invincible warrior, a critical aspect of Mongol prestige. When I passed away in 1294, I left behind a declining empire. My successors were considerably weaker. Between 1294 and 1368, in merely 74 years, the Yuan dynasty saw 11 different emperors. On average, each emperor ruled for fewer than 7 years. From 1308 to 1332, there were 8 emperors. 2 of them were assassinated, and all passed away at a young age. Why did this occur? Due to the absence of clear succession rules. After each emperor's death, various factions vied to install their preferred candidate on the throne. Central authority waned, and power shifted to local warlords who utilized armies to augment their own strength rather than serve the empire. To make matters worse, the Yuan dynasty failed to gain acceptance from the Han Chinese. The Mongols remained segregated, unwilling to assimilate into Chinese culture. Mongol women did not bind their feet, a custom that had become a mark of high status in China. They wore their own garments, ate their own cuisine, and celebrated their own festivals. This created a deep schism within society. The Mongols formed the ruling class, exempt from taxes and enjoying privileges, yet they were a minority. The Han Chinese, comprising the majority of the population, harbored resentment towards them. From the late 1340s, the country was plagued by natural disasters, droughts, floods, and famine. The Yuan government lacked effective strategies to combat these issues. In 1351, the Red Turban Rebellion erupted, which began as a peasant uprising and rapidly escalated into a nationwide revolt. The last Yuan emperor, Togon Timur, was weak and politically apathetic. He spent his time engaged in esoteric Tibetan Buddhist rituals and entertainment. In 1368, when Ming forces approached Beijing, Togon Timur did not even attempt to defend the capital. He simply fled. He retreated north to Shangdu, then to Karakoram. 2 years later, he died in Yingchang, Inner Mongolia. The Mongol Empire in China ceased to exist. While the Yuan dynasty collapsed in China, other Mongol khanates faced similar difficulties. The Ilkhanate in Persia was the first to fall. In 1335, after the death of Abu Sa'id Bahadur, there was no obvious heir, and the Ilkhanate fragmented into numerous smaller entities. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia also splintered, with various factions constantly in conflict. The Golden Horde in Russia endured the longest, until the 15th century, but it too gradually weakened and fragmented into smaller khanates. In 1552, Russian Tsar Ivan the Terrible defeated the last remaining Mongol principalities in Kazan and Astrakhan, signaling the end of Mongol dominance in Europe. What became of the Mongols in Mongolia? They reverted to their nomadic way of life, dispersing into warring tribes. Karakoram, the great capital of Genghis Khan, was razed by Chinese armies in 1388. The unified Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history, was no more. However, history is not solely defined by collapse. Despite the relatively short lifespan of the Mongol Empire, lasting only about 150 years from its unification by Genghis Khan to its complete dissolution, its legacy resonates even today. Economically, the Mongols established the most prosperous Silk Road in history. They introduced the Yam system, a network of postal stations that facilitated rapid communication over thousands of miles. They protected merchants, reduced taxes, and standardized weights and measures. During this period, concepts such as bills of exchange, deposit banks, and insurance traveled from Asia to Europe. Culturally, thanks to Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, culture and knowledge circulated freely across Eurasia. Islamic mathematics and astronomy reached Europe. Papermaking and printing technologies from China spread westward. Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, and many other explorers could travel safely across Asia, which was unimaginable before the Mongol era. Administratively, many Mongol governance systems were adopted by subsequent dynasties. The Chinese Ming dynasty incorporated elements of the Mongol garrison system. Ranxian monarchs adopted Mongolian administrative tactics and warfare strategies. Yet, there were also grim chapters in history. It's believed that the Black Death, a plague that annihilated a third of Europe's population, spread along the Silk Road. Millions perished during the Mongolian conquests. Cities such as Baghdad and Samarkand were devastated. Libraries and cultural monuments met their end. History isn't black and white, it's a spectrum of gray. So, what wisdom can we glean from the narrative of the Mongol Empire after Genghis Khan? The first lesson: reliance solely on individuals doesn't guarantee stable succession. Genghis Khan established his empire on the bedrock of personal loyalty. Following his demise, no system existed to preserve unity. His successors frequently contended to restore this allegiance. Modern successful organizations grasp this principle. They forge systems, develop culture, and instill values, elements that persist regardless of any specific individual. The second lesson: diversity demands unity. The Mongol Empire encompassed a myriad of cultures, religions, and ways of life. This was both a source of its strength and its vulnerability. When a common objective, like conquering new territories, vanished, these differences escalated into divisions. Muslims in the Golden Horde couldn't reconcile with the slaughter of Muslims in Baghdad. Traditional Mongols disapproved of Kublai becoming too Chinese. The takeaway: diversity is beneficial, but it necessitates cohesion via core values. The third lesson: adapt or perish. Kublai Khan understood that governing China would require him to embrace Chinese culture. However, he also wished to retain his Mongolian identity. This was a precarious balance that the Yuan dynasty ultimately failed to maintain. They weren't Chinese enough to be accepted by the Han, yet they became too Chinese for traditional Mongols. Today, global corporations face a similar dilemma. How can one localize while upholding a global identity? This was a question the Mongols wrestled with 700 years ago. The fourth lesson: power abhors a vacuum.
Each time a great Khan died, a period of anticipation ensued, sometimes lasting years, until a successor was chosen. In this power vacuum, factions solidified influence, formed alliances, and prepared for conflict. The lesson is clear: leadership uncertainty in any organization breeds chaos. A well-defined succession plan is crucial. The fifth lesson: winning a war doesn't equate to securing peace. Kublai triumphed in the civil war against Ögedei, but this victory had a steep price: the ultimate fragmentation of the empire.
The Western Uluses never recognized Kublai's authority. Sometimes, the manner of victory is more consequential than the victory itself. Let's revisit the initial query. Could the Mongol Empire have endured longer if its inheritors had made different choices? The answer? Possibly. If Genghis Khan had established clear rules of primogeniture instead of relying on the Chagatai, where power often went to the strongest rather than the most suitable. If Ögedei had consumed less alcohol and lived longer to finish the conquest of Europe and build a more robust administrative system. If Monk had named a successor before his death, thus averting the civil war between Kublai and Ögedei. If Kublai had found a way to reconcile the Western Khanates instead of allowing them to become completely independent. If the Yuan emperors after Kublai had been more capable and more invested in statecraft. But history doesn't entertain hypotheticals. History only knows what transpired. And what transpired was this. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history by area, disintegrated for the same reasons many other great empires crumbled. These include a lack of clear rules for succession, internal power struggles, an inability to adapt to emerging challenges, and increasing alienation between the ruling class and the populace. The history of the Mongol Empire after Genghis Khan isn't merely a tale of the past. It's a narrative relevant to the present and future. Because the challenges the Mongols confronted, how to preserve unity amidst diversity, how to adapt without losing identity, how to seamlessly transfer power, are the exact same challenges we face today in our families, workplaces, and societies. History is a mirror. It doesn't furnish answers, but it poses the appropriate questions. So, reflect on your own life, your own organization. Are you constructing sustainable systems, or are you solely depending on individuals? Are you preparing for shifts in power, or are you permitting them to unfold chaotically? Are you adjusting to changes, or are you striving to uphold the status quo? These are the questions the Mongols faced, and the answers they forged profoundly shaped global history. If this video offered you a fresh perspective on history, please hit the like button and subscribe to support the channel in producing more quality content. Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below on what you consider the most crucial element contributing to the Mongol Empire's downfall, and whether we are presently replicating similar errors. And remember, you haven't yet addressed the initial query: where are you tuning in from, and what time is it there currently? Please post that in the comment section as well. I appreciate you watching. Catch you in the next video.